Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Who Has to Know or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Britt. Who Has to Know? Chapter 4. Riel was out on a ledge. There was no way back. The only way was down, and she knew it. What happened with Scylla on Friday night played out in her mind over and over in a loop. Scylla's soft lips and sharp gasps as Riel brought her over the edge were seared into Riel's memory despite her best efforts to forget them. She'd spend the rest of her weekend in denial about what happened, packing it away in a neat little box that she could deal with later. But it was Monday morning, and she would have to face the other girl soon enough. They had biology together, the class before lunch, and Riel was painfully aware that they'd be sitting side by side at a table. "Collar! Shit or get off the pot!" Coach Alder came up from below, shaking Riel out of her reverie. She realized she was standing on the edge of the diving board, her hands out in position in front of her, ready to jump. She'd spaced out, staring at the water below, and Alder didn't sound happy about it. Riel pulled herself together and did a forward dive with a twist. Her form was sloppy, and she entered the water wrong. Her front struck the water flat, knocking the wind out of her. She surfaced moments later, her lungs heaving as she fought to take a breath. Standing by Alder next to the bleachers, Glory moved to dive in and to help her, but Alder held a hand out to stop her, letting Riel struggle. She fought the initial shock of hitting the water wrong and swum to the side, pulling herself up out of the pool. Glory let out the breath she'd been holding once Riel was safely sitting on the edge, her feet dangling in the water while she sat catching her breath. "Collar, what the hell was that?" the older woman bellowed at her, her normally pale cheeks red with anger. "I've seen middle-aged men in water parks do better than that." Riel dragged herself to her feet and padded over to the bleachers to face her. "Sorry, Coach." "Get your head in the game, Collar. This is your senior year. Shitty dives like that won't get you All-American again this year, and they certainly won't impress scouts. You're only as good as your last dive, remember that." "Yes, Coach," Riel mumbled, averting the other woman's hawk-like gaze. "It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," snapped Alder. Riel kicked herself mentally all the way to the dressing room. She had enough going on in her head without making the coach mad at her too. It was all Scylla's damn fault for kissing her by the pool in the first place. The other girl had a lot to answer for. Riel yanked her locker open, the metal door clanging loudly against the nearest locker and making Glory jump. She gave Riel a sheepish smile, not commenting on her disaster in the pool. Libba wasn't quite so genial. "What happened out there, Collar? You get brain freeze? Or just figure you'll never be as good as me, so what's the point in trying?" Libba shot her a feral grin from the other side of the locker room. Libba's beef with Abigail extended to Abigail's friends. Though she had a begrudging respect for Riel as a fellow diver, and her teasing was usually harmless. Riel wasn't in the mood for it, though. "Fuck off, Libba," she grunted, yanking her towel out of her locker. Her shampoo bottle went bouncing out too, rolling across the tiled floor with a clatter. "Fuck!" Riel chased after it with a scowl. "Are you okay, Riel?" Glory asked, being a lot more tactful than Libba. "I'm fine," Riel huffed. Snatching her shampoo bottle up from the floor, she stormed off to take a shower before class. She had Alder for English first lesson, and the last thing she needed was to be late. Riel's morning went from bad to worse. After her disaster in the pool, Alder only went and sprung a pub quiz on her in English, and Raelle hadn't even done the reading over the weekend. Something else that was Scylla's fault. Her mood was black by the time she walked into the biology classroom. She was pleasantly surprised to see Scylla's seat empty. Maybe Scylla hadn't shown up for school today, after all. A rush of relief passed through her as she took her own seat. The knot in her stomach was easing when the first bell rang and Scylla came rushing through the door. She took her seat without a single look at Raelle, and somehow that made the blonde all the more mad at her. She hunched forward, leaning her arms on the desk and staring straight ahead with her lips pursed together. Beside her, Scylla pulled her things out of her backpack and set them on the table, still without so much as a glance in Raelle's direction. The tension in the air between the two of them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Raelle's fist tightened around the pencil she was holding until it threatened to snap. Isadora took the register and then started the lesson, picking up where they left off on Friday afternoon. They hadn't covered as much as she wanted, so they weren't starting the new topic like Isadora had hoped. Scylla finally gave Raelle a sideway glance, but only when she noticed the other girl actually taking notes. Raelle was doing anything she could to distract herself from Scylla's proximity and the cloying scent of her perfume, which only served to remind Raelle of the tang of Scylla's skin as she had kissed her way down her throat the other night. Raelle bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to hurt, her eyes fixed on her notepad as Isadora rambled on about the nervous system. Okay. To finish, I would like you to tackle the questions at the end of this chapter in your textbooks. Discuss the answers in your pairs and work through as many as you can. Raelle and Scylla shared a brief, panic-filled look before Scylla opened her book to the page Isadora instructed them to and made a start on the questions without her. She hunched her shoulders, shifting in her seat so that she had her back to Raelle. That suited Raelle just fine. She opened her own book, propped her chin in her hand, and read through the first question. The two girls worked in silence for what was left of the lesson, while the rest of the class chatted freely. Raelle tapped her fingers of her left hand against their shared desk while she worked through the problem. Every rap of her clipped nails against the wooden tabletop reverberated through Scylla, until Raelle's damp fingers were all she could focus on. Fingers that were buried knuckle-deep inside of her only days ago. Scylla fought the urge to grab Raelle's hand to make the tapping stop. A few minutes before the end of the lesson, Isadora asked them all to put their pencils down. Your homework for this week is to create a presentation summarizing what we've covered in this topic. This is a group project, and I expect you to work in your pairs. A collective groan rang out among the class. It's due Monday, Isadora added, shouting above the noise of the bell and the teens all rushing to pack up. Scylla couldn't pack her things up quick enough. She all but ran out of the class without so much as a second glance at Raelle. Raelle moved at a much slower pace, in no hurry to follow Scylla to the cafeteria. She was considering eating her lunch in the natatorium when Isadora called to her. Raelle, can I have a word? Isadora asked as Raelle fell in behind Tally and Abigail on their way out of the classroom. Sure, Raelle said, even though Isadora's question had been rhetorical. Tally and Abigail shot her sympathetic glances on their way out. Raelle shouldered her backpack and stood leaning against the nearest desk as she waited for whatever it was Isadora had in store for her. The older woman pushed her glasses to the top of her head, and she folded her arms over her chest and fixed Raelle with a stare. You and Scylla were supposed to be working together. That was the deal, remember? Tell that to her, Raelle huffed defensively, hating that she sounded like a whining 5-year-old in front of one of her favorite teachers. Yet another thing that was all Scylla's fault. I will, said Isadora, but that's not why I kept you back. I spoke to Coach Alder about diving scholarships. She thinks you have a good chance at one. There are other options too, particularly for STEM fields. We can discuss it in your free period on Wednesday and go over your options. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, I appreciate it. Raelle felt like the ton weight that had been resting on her chest was lifted. One of them, at least. She had looked at different scholarships and their requirements on her own, and it had felt like she was trying to read Latin blindfolded. You can show me your appreciation by meeting me halfway. Work with Miss Vermshorn on the homework. The two of you are capable of incredible things together, I'm sure. Raelle bit the inside of her cheek, flashes of the last activity they had done together running through her mind. I'll try. Their lunch table was already full by the time Raelle got to the cafeteria. Telly had saved Raelle her usual seat beside her, though. Raelle sat down, her eyes flitting to the other side of the table where Scylla sat with her nose buried in a book. "What did Isadora want with you?" Abigail asked before Raelle even pulled her lunch out of her bag. Raelle's tongue darted out against her lip as she shrugged. "She was riding my ass about not working with Scylla." It wasn't an outright lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Raelle ducked her head and picked at the sandwich her mom had packed for her. She glared at the girl in question. "Like it's my fault the bookworm thinks she's too good to work with me." Raelle popped one of her earphones in and propped her chin up with her hand while she ate. She wasn't in the mood to join in with that conversation around the table. "Are you okay, Ray?" Telly asked a short while later. Her features schooled into a look of concern. "You've been off since the party." Telly's observation of the blonde caught Scylla's attention, and she peered up from the book she was using as an excuse not to look at the other girl. Raelle caught her looking, out of the corner of her eye. "Hey, Syl, want half of my muffin?" Porter held the sweet treat under her nose, and Scylla recoiled like she shoved a live snake in her face. "No, thank you," she said. "Suit yourself, babe." Porter shrugged and slung one arm over her shoulder while he tugged into the muffin. Raelle felt something stirring in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't something she could label, but whatever it was, she didn't like it. She looked away from the happy couple with a sneer and pushed her lunch away from her. "I'm fine, Telly, I'm just not hungry." Raelle stood up without another word to the others and stalked out of the cafeteria. Her eyes peering out above her book, Scylla watched her go. Raelle made her way to the natatorium, deciding it would be safer to hide out by the pool for the rest of the lunch period. She popped her earbuds in and lay down on the bottom bleacher. She turned up the volume, letting the music wash over her as she closed her eyes and tried to block the rest of the world out. The water was her safe space, the one place she could go to block everything else out. At least it usually was. The door opened with a creak, though it was unheard by Raelle. She only realized she wasn't alone anymore when a shadow fell over her. Raelle opened her eyes to find the last person she wanted to see standing over her. Scylla hovered in front of her, awkwardly clutching the strap of her bag and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. Raelle popped out her earbuds and pocketed them in the front of her jeans with a heavy sigh. She sat up, her heavy boots hitting off the floor with a thud. "What do you want, Scylla?" Raelle didn't waste time with pleasantries. It wasn't like they were friends. Scylla didn't even blink at the venom in her tone. Raelle expected her to lounge into some torrent about what happened Friday night, but not for the first time, the other girl surprised her. "The biology project. We need to arrange a time together to meet." A hint of a blush crept over Scylla's porcelain cheeks as she stumbled over her words. "I have a free period Wednesday and Friday. We can meet in the library?" "I have training Friday's free period, and I can't Wednesday." Raelle had her meeting with Isadora about scholarship applications then, though she wasn't about to tell that to Scylla. "I'm busy." Scylla's expression twisted to look like she was chewing on a lemon as her nostrils flared and she pursed her lips. "Fine, I'll do the work myself. We can tell Isadora you helped." "I don't need little Miss Know-It-All doing my homework for me. Thank you very much," Raelle snapped. "Despite what you might think, I'm not some brain-dead jog. I'll do my part. We'll just have to meet after school." "Fine," Scylla folded her arms over her chest. "When are you not too busy?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Raelle bit back a snappy retort. She took a breath and counted to 5 before answering through gritted teeth. "I have diving practice Tuesdays and Thursdays. I have debate club Wednesday. I guess it'll have to be Friday then," said Raelle. She glanced away, her cheeks warming as she inadvertently thought of the last Friday night they had spent together. She cleared her throat, her eyes fixed to the tiled floor as she asked, "Does that work for you?" "Yeah, sure." Neither of them suggested meeting up after school that night. Scylla reached into her bag and pulled out her notebook and a pen. She scribbled her email address down before holding it out to Raelle. The other girl snatched the paper out of her hand and shoved it into her front pocket. Scylla opened her mouth like she had something else she wanted to say, but quickly snapped it shut as she lost her nerve. She turned her back on Raelle and walked away without another word. Raelle let out a sigh of relief and flopped back down on the bleacher. And then she realized she'd agreed to spend time with Scylla, alone, on Friday afternoon. Fuck. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.